Today we have a unique Patreon interview here because we're actually talking to one of my Patreon supporters, Adrian or ThePykeSpy, about learning Old Norse, your strategies for learning and practicing with writing. And I thought we'd start off with just asking you to talk a little bit about your background with this. What made you approach Old Norse, and how did you decide to approach it the way that you have?
I mean, I guess I'll have to give a bit of an extended background. It's just I study history. I'm a history student in my 8th semester, so I've always been um, a history kind of person, and in really in all directions. So there's I like language history, political history, all of that. And I guess how it's done. I'm also one of those weird people that history is my hobby. Like I do it both for work, so to speak, and for my free time. I guess that's a little bit contrary to what you do, you know. And I don't know. It was just the Old Norse thing, as I wrote in the one Patreon comment I left for you. I wasn't really ever into Vikings or Old Norse culture in general. Like that wasn't really something I ever cared about. Probably because due to the fact I'm German, and especially in German, you know, the whole Germanic and Viking and stuff, it has connotations because, you know, we have the whole Nazi history and how the Old Norse stuff was misused there. So there's a certain degree of stigma which I still carry. When I see elder Fudak tattoos, I'm still a little bit skeptical, you know, like, you know, we've had this before. Do we really need to go there again? But then I stumbled upon your videos, and it was eye-opening because I'd always carried like prejudice against these things also, and then seeing somebody talk about it in a scientific context, you know, what are the facts, and then just the sheer amount of false information that was dashed for me after just a few videos really got me hooked. And so I guess one of the things that I'm also personally really interested in is just language in general. Now that I think about it, it was really a thing I have a Hebrew German dictionary. I have a Latin German dictionary. You know, biblical languages was really big when I was younger, and so I guess seeing just how much we have in Old Norse and how accessible it was just really hooked me, because I thought this isn't impossible. I can do this.
Hmm.
I
Well,
mean, of
and
course, it's a Scandinavian language, but then I guess this kind of gets into the whole my learning strategies already. Having German and English as my languages seems to me like the best Voraussetzungen, you know, uh, like the best conditions to learn Old Norse, because I think I tend to think of it as like the cases and the nouns, and that is almost identical to German, so I don't really have to learn anything new there. And then the grammar seems really similar to English, in like the way that prepositions are used or that certain words carry meaning. And so I feel like if I just mix German and English enough, I can sort of get into Old Norse without really having to learn about the grammar specifically.
yeah, I think that
Which,
you do have a leg up with the grammar from German. I agree with you there. Having internalized from your first language learning all of the cases, and if not the exact same endings, at least where there will be different endings.
right.
Um, and of course, things like umlaut, you're used to in a much more systematic way than in English, because German, of course, preserves a much more systematic umlaut alternation. Yeah, I think you've got a little bit of a leg up. Um,
Which is always a funny part to me. You know, I'm more of a casual guy when I say these things, but I know that your audience is probably primarily either American or largely English speaking. Of course, there's a few Scandinavian people, I'm sure. It's like you always explaining in detail, like, you know, the cases and all those things. I'm like, you don't have to tell me this. I know this.
well, of course. Well, um, I mean, I obviously can't assume that everybody knows German. Although, if
Right.
you read early 20th century and 19th century grammars, they typically do kind of assume that everybody knows German, because typically back then, college students in the humanities and even the sciences did know German. It's pretty fascinating when you look at just a slice of scholarly life from less than a century ago, when Oppenheimer and the other scientists were working on the atomic bomb. A lot of the research papers that started that field of inquiry were in German, and they read them in German. Oppenheimer studied in Germany. So it used to be something that academics had easy access to, but I definitely don't assume that anymore.
But not just in those fields. I think in Old Norse, that one book you always quote, I think it's Noreen. He's
Yeah, no,
he's a German,
he's
and I
Swedish.
guess he's a
He was
Swede.
Swedish, but he wrote in German. Yeah.
Okay, I assume that has a colorful backstory that I'm not aware of.
I don't think it's too colorful. I think it's just 100 years ago, Scandinavians writing for a larger audience, instead of writing in English, tended to write in German, just on the assumption that scholars would read that. And it was before there had been as much English language popular culture seeping in over there.
Then again, I do think when I think of Scandinavia, Low German does have a huge impact on the modern Scandinavian languages, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, enormous. I mean, for example, just thinking of all the common vocabulary in the Scandinavian languages today, that's pretty much anything with the prefix "ba," right? Batala is pay, right? Obviously from Batalen. It's all over the Scandinavian languages today, to the point that it feels like native vocabulary, the same way that so much Old Norse vocabulary feels like native vocabulary in English.
It's a thing. I have a somewhat of a Norwegian acquaintance. I wouldn't call him a friend, but an acquaintance over the internet. And one of the things we do for fun is just saying, this is a Norwegian word. Is it the same in German? Like, I think it started off with talking about the word for light bulb, because in German it's like Glühbirne, like glowing pear, and then it's like, is that the same in Norwegian? Yes, it is. Like it's the same sort of, and I think that's because a large amount of loan words came from Low German into Danish and Norwegian.
Yeah, well, and then on top of that, the languages are not so far apart on the Germanic branch, so a lot of basic vocabulary is similar anyway. But yeah, so I can see how that would be a leg up for you. And then, of course, one thing that I think is really unique and interesting that you do is you write in Old Norse, and you write considerable amounts in Old Norse. So what got you started with that, and what is your process, if you will, with that?
I mean, the reasons are, as I said before, history is both like a work thing and a personal thing. It's just I've always liked fantasy. I guess I'm a little bit in the vein of Tolkien, not from the level of intellect, but from like he did it for fun, I guess, and so do I. I just like the idea, because my argument is we have the knowledge of how these languages work, so why not use them? Like I really don't see the stigma of dead language. I mean, yes, of course, no one can read what I write, but that doesn't matter in that moment. Like if no one starts doing that, and how will it ever come back to life, so to say?
And well, I mean, I guess we could ask at that point, does it need to come back to life? But this is
Right.
a Ronnie kind of attitude toward the language that I think is
Yes, I've become acquainted with the teachings of our Lord and Savior Luke Rainieri.
I wonder what he would think to
Linguistic necromancy. Lovely.
Actually, I'm going to make sure that that he has the link to this in case he's awake right now. Because if he is, he goes back and forth between the East Coast and Italy.
Right.
His schedule is really weird. I just want him to know that he has the option to log in here if he's awake.
The thing is, one of my friends is a big fan of Luke, and so it was a little bit funny when he talked to me like, "Oh, look, I found this channel that does Latin language," and then I'm like, Yeah, I know. I'm in the circle already. I have my own guy. I have Dr. Crawford. He does it, but in Old Norse. And so me finding out that you two have done content together was rather nice, so to say.
Well, I mean, I don't compare myself to Ronnie, especially having met him in person. Like, he has a soul in ways that I don't. Uh, he is he he does everything that he does with so much joy. And I tell you what, I mean, again, this isn't exactly what we came to talk about, but it is amazing the degree to which Ronnie in person is exactly who you would think he is from his videos. Like, he is that just joyous. It's really amazing.
Right. But let's not go off topic too much.
Yeah, Stella, that's a good. I had never thought about doing that, about actually linking with a search query. See, I learn things every day. So your particular writing project, though, which we've been looking at in office hours, for those who maybe are new around here every month for the last few months, I guess since April or so. I think it was April.
It was two separate projects. One, I think we never finished the first because I sort of switched halfway through, but the second one was far more important anyway.
Yeah. So explain what these are.
So the first one was I've been knee deep in medieval chronicles because I'm in the last 2 weeks of in the last weeks of writing my bachelor's paper on medieval chronicles, and so that sort of genre has appealed to me. And so I was thinking, I like fantasy stories, I like the style of a chronicle, I like Old Norse. That was the first project. Why not combine them and come up with something, just anything that sounds cool and medieval-ish? And then the second one was really, there's this lovely channel on the internet that does pop songs in old languages. I think they actually have the Immigrant Song from Led Zeppelin in Old Norse. I was going to recommend that you look at that.
What is the name of the channel?
I have no idea. I need to look that up real quick.
I feel like I've seen it recommended to me. I'm sure someone can think of it. I've never looked at it. I've just seen it recommended.
It's by The Miracle Aligner. That's the name.
Miracle Aligner.
And so I was thinking to myself, look, I want to write stuff, but I also need to not lose Dr. Crawford the instant I talk about it, because I totally understand if you're like, you don't care because it's fantasy stuff, you don't have a connection to it. So I was like, how can I make this engaging for my teacher? And so I looked at the list of things that I know about, like America and the West, and I was like, oh, I have the big iron song. That sounds cool. I like that. Why not put that into Old Norse? Because then, of course, we get into how I did it. Is the next step is you need something that works with the themes, which is what you did with Tatooine Saga. I think you looked at, it's not about the story itself working. It's like Star Wars has lightsabers. That doesn't work in Old Norse. It's about the themes that need to translate. Because if it's about themes that the Norse can't express, then you can't write it.
Right. I was thinking about this just as you started to say it. Like it is so hard to explain exactly what works and what doesn't, but you kind of know it when you see it.
Right.
It's not easy to take a lot of science fiction or fantasy and put it into Old Norse. I mean, not just because of the technology, but because exactly, the themes are so foreign.
Like, look at if you look at Dune, that just doesn't work. That's
that'd be very
too big in the scope of what it does.
Yeah, or even like I was trying to think if Star Trek would work. Star Trek,
I had the same thought.
It might work kind of episodically, little by little. Like each episode could kind of be a thauter, like one of the little stories, or even something maybe almost as long as like Greenlanding a Saga. But
like a crew of Vikings traveling through different lands, and they have an episode, like a small story with. I could see where you're getting, but then the theme gets lost, like the whole people coming together and overcoming human nature, to act rationally, and that just doesn't work. That's not what the Norse write about.
No, it would just become like an adventure story, which, it still works, but it's not exactly what I think Gene Roddenberry probably intended.
Right, but then Old West stories are good in the way that I've heard the comparison made. I think you've made it too. Iceland is the Norse Old West, so it's rather easy to translate the American Old West into Icelandic Old West, I guess.
Yeah, I think that does work well. Partially because you have, I think you can overstate the similarity in the culture. I think pretty much any frontier society is going to have some similar things, and it's not some special link between the Old West and Iceland, but yeah, just the human struggles are very similar.
And then I guess if I'm supposed to go a little bit more in depth on how I guess you could call it a translation in the sense that you're translating the events. The thing is, you have to look at the entire story. I really don't know if I should put on the lyrics of the song, or if I should put up the Word document, but I don't think it'll help. The thing is,
let us see it so you can
okay,
just illustrate it.
Just have to figure out how to do it. Now, can you see it?
Yep.
So the thing with the story is, first you have to kind of take the story apart and then look at the things that you need to put in place for it all to work, because just going from front to back doesn't really work. Because when I started off, I was thinking, where do I put the story? Is it more of a Norwegian thing, more of a Swedish thing, more of an Icelandic thing? And first I was thinking, I could put it in Norway, but then the cultural background doesn't work. It's too much. It's too dense culture. Like it's the old world, and this Old West kind of thing just doesn't work. So I was thinking, okay, many stories in the sagas feature people coming from Norway to Iceland, outlaws. So I think, yeah, that's a good base. Let's go with that. And then really all it boils down to is looking through the sagas and trying to kind of find the tropes that you're looking for. I think I based most of this on Liot the Pale from Egil's Saga. Like, the description of him being an outlaw who has no family, who comes to Iceland from Norway, and it fits. So you just tweak small things.
Well, and I think that's a great, by the way, if I can just interrupt you in your presentation here, I think
it's a great way. I tend to ramble.
But I think it's a great way of going about this is, it's not just imitation being the sincerest form of flattery. It's that if you know where to go in the sagas to say the right things, then, you're learning the sagas well as you learn the language well. And I think you're exactly right that the presentation of someone like Liotr the Pale and Egil Saga is a great example of an outlaw's intro that's not too different from an outlaw's intro in one of these Old West songs, and to adapt it from one medium to the other, I think shows deep understanding of both medium.
Right, and the thing is, I guess that's kind of the whole point of what's happening here. It's a tangent again. Reading it in the sagas is kind of problematic, because you need to build a connection to what you're reading. So writing it down, and like the thing is, for example, when I learned about that, when you have a dependent clause, you need to put like that in front of it. Like in the first line, Samada aflat serfia, that sticks with me now, because I wanted to write this, I didn't know, and so I had to go to you and you told me, and now that kind of thing will stick with me. I'll be able to recognize it because I had to figure it out. I wanted to learn it.
Right.
Which I guess if the tangent here is, I'm learning Japanese on the side for real in university, and that works because I have a connection to what I'm learning. I used to learn Spanish in school, which is much easier than Japanese, and the teacher was a lovely woman and she did a great job, but I had absolutely no personal connection whatsoever to Spanish. And so nothing stuck.
Right.
It was like throwing dry spaghetti at a wall. It just does not stick.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And of course, with a living language, you can get that personal investment somewhat more easily if you have, friends or media that you particularly want to consume or something like that. Getting that with the older languages is hard. And I absolutely agree with you that when I have written in Old Norse, I have learned lessons from doing so that have stuck with me exactly because uh, I was trying to write in a way that was natural, and I didn't realize what was natural until I tried to do it.
Right. It's the thing, like you can't hold a dialogue with people in Old Norse. You kind of have to go into a dialogue with the texts, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's well put.
And then I guess it's just the thing of finding good cultural analogs. Like for example, in the original song, it's the town of Agua Fria. So you look at it and say, there are no towns in Iceland. That doesn't work. But like Dale's Tatooine de la Saga, like the story of the people of the Tatooine Valley. And so just you make it the cold water Dale instead
Right.
of the cold water town, because I think there's even a place in Iceland called Kaldvatn or something. I'm not too sure.
That could be, yeah.
But then of course you have to build on that, because now there's no towns. It's all spread apart farms. So where do they meet? Like, and then okay, there's the house of the Gothi, like of the chief of the valley, where people would most likely be. So you have him go there, and then that's where the servant of the outlaw finds out that there's a challenge, because then you have to think about the logistics, like how does he find out
Mm-hmm.
about the challenge and all that. And so really you go through the thing and you try to think of what analogies can I work with, and then what do I have to change to make it work.
Right. Right. Well, and in the process, like I said, you learn so much about the language, and you learn more about the culture and literature that you're imitating and that you're adapting. Um, you know, it, if you have the motivation to do it, it is a great learning tool.
The only downside that there is really, and this is something I have to amend, is I've done this sort of thing before, like get into a language to the point where I can write. I have taken classes on classical Japanese, like medieval Japanese. And the thing is, I've learned how to work with the language. So if I have a dictionary and with a list of how the verbs are conjugated or the nouns are declined, then I know what I need to take to put it together, but I don't have the skills. Like for example, when you grill me on what adjective endings I need, so I haven't memorized that yet. So that's something that's missing, where I would then need an actual class to fill in that side. So if I had to sum it up, many people like the part of writing it themselves. I like the part of actually professionally learning it.
Mm-hmm.
And you notice it because the most complicated sentences in my translation are usually stolen from a source or from your work, so to say. Like I can put it together and make it work, but really, the deeper understanding you can't get from this.
Hmm. Yeah, I see what you mean. Still, I mean, as one tool in your toolbox, it's very useful.
Right. This isn't the fix all thing. Like you still have to sit down and take a class with Dr. Crawford.
Well, or whatever the closest equivalent is these days.
There are I'm in so much pain because on my university has no Scandinavia department. I was like, maybe I could take like a course off the record, like not for credits, but just for, and they don't have any.
Well, most universities.
Such a pain.
I mean, it's not exactly a common offering, which is so strange because it's so popular. By the way, Elena asks, are you composing in Old Norse directly or writing what you intend to say in German and then translating it into Old Norse?
I mean, that's exactly the thing, is you have to get into the mindset. You have to actually write in Old Norse, which because translations always end up, you try to, you're looking for a way to say something in a language that works differently. So I usually I write it in English. I start in English, but then I actually try to think of how would they have phrased it. So it's that's really the important part that you have to get. You can't just translate it. You have to actually get into the way of thinking.
I'm curious if you have a comparison to an experience that I have sometimes. If I'm trying to write, um, say, an email in a language that I'm not 100% familiar with, and I'm just starting out writing it in the target language, I can sometimes find myself wanting to take shortcuts and say something that's actually much simpler or a little bit different from what I really mean to say, just because it's something I'm more comfortable with in the target language.
Mm.
And I find that if I go ahead and just write that email in English and then have that there, not necessarily as what I'm translating from, but as a comparison at the end, like, let me make sure that I really did say what I meant to say. Here it is in English. Does this say the same thing? That can actually help me. And it's not exactly, again, translating from the English, but it's like, here's the comparison, the comparandum that I'm nailing to the door. Does it mean the same thing? Okay, yes, it does. Now I'll send this.
Right. That is, the thing is, since I really only speak German and English fluently and no other languages enough to write emails, I don't have that exact same problem. But the thing is, well, for me personally, it's you really start to learn a language when you can think in it. So when you're not looking for what's the literal equivalent to what I'm trying to say, but what's the, oh God, the
Well, what is
I,
fully semantically the equivalent, right? Because it's not necessarily going to be word by word. Um, wasn't Richard Simcott talking about this a couple weeks ago, where he said, well, he had a really different take on it because he said that he doesn't think in any language. I don't.
right.
I
That was my question. I think I try to sort of get into that.
Yeah, and I'm still wondering what exactly I haven't
I
totally
guess
processed.
what I meant is, I can it's weird saying like I'm talking to myself in my head, but that's what I meant when I say, can I think in a language? Like I can fluidly speak English in my head. I can't do that with Japanese. For example, with Japanese, I still have to sit down and I have to say, okay, I have to look up some things. The grammar doesn't probably work. Like, I just can't right now.
Right. I think there's also a difference receptively where, like, if somebody talks to me in Norwegian or Swedish, I can hear it all in Norwegian or Swedish, right? I
Yeah,
don't have to.
that's what I mean. Like you don't have to think like, oh, he said this and that. It's just like
Right.
it
Right.
straight into the brain.
But in Spanish, which I don't know as well, if somebody's talking to me in Spanish, I am kind of doing like, okay, this means that, this means that. Like I actually have to take that moment to convert. Um, I think that that's I, I'd be interested to hear what he thinks about that too, but we will have to have him back.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's what you think in it or not is an interesting question. Now, back in my uh in my youth or whatever, I can remember trying to set up situations where I would have to think in Old Norse. And one of my
Mhm.
weird things that I did for a while, and I wonder if you've tried anything like this, is I decided when I am driving, I am going to think in Old Norse. And I actually did this for a fair while. Um, it starts out being hard, but eventually you kind of wear the right paths in your brain to where
Right. That's the
it's
wearing the paths is a really good analogy.
yeah. At first, the paths are not worn at all, and you're really macheting your way through slowly. But you kind of get used to, I guess, this vocabulary of expressing yourself and looking things up when you get back to a dictionary or something. Uh,
Right.
Anyway, so show us your current project.
I the thing is, I haven't really decided on what I want to do next. I've been taking a bit of a break because I've had to write actually important things, which I guess which I wanted to talk about a little bit later after we're done here, because there's some overlap with the Old Norse topic. I've been thinking about doing like the Bonnie M song Ma Baker in Old Norse.
Okay.
For no reason. Your reaction already sells me on it. Where I'm thinking, how can I, how would that parse out? Because in essence, it's still a story about an Old West-esque story. So I guess with a female protagonist, which doesn't really seem too.
Yeah, there's Hervor. There are female protagonists. Lockstyle Saga is very driven by women.
Right. Wait, I think I actually, oh yeah, I actually have a small thing I've already prepared. I can share that if you want to.
Yeah.
I'll close this and open.
Thomas is so kind as to call me the master of analogies. I actually thought of another analogy amidst all this that I didn't even share. Probably for the best.
Right. This is really rough, but just going off the first line, this is the story of Ma Baker, the meanest cat in old Chicago town, right? Something along those lines, just the basics are like starting off with this is the story, like this is the saga of that random woman's name. And then you get the first kind of questions, like how do you translate a last name into English? Well, into Old Norse. And it's like, well, just if she's Ma Baker, just call her the baker's wife.
Yeah, right. Something like that. That makes sense. Yeah. So the Boxer corner. Yeah.
Right. And then this was my favorite. How do you translate Old Chicago town into Old Norse? Now here it gets interesting, because from what I've read, Chicago is based on, and please excuse me not knowing any of the names of, I'm really not an America kind of person either, but of some tribe, the word of like some kind of leek, or like the place where the leeks grow or something. So me look up leeks in Cleesby Wigfusson, find Laukergarde, like the garden where the leeks grow, realize that Garde is also a word that can be used for town, like Nyagarde for Novgorod, and then there you go. Call the town Laukergarde.
I think it's a great solution. And by the way, I mean, I would not have known that as the origin of Chicago. People don't,
it was a short Wikipedia search. I just, no one cares if it's accurate right now. I'm not writing a paper on something, a scientific paper. I can cite Wikipedia on this.
I like the way that you decided to handle it. I mean, I was trying to think of what I would have done. It's a good solution. I mean, another solution might be to take a nickname like the Windy City, but I like the Onion Town, Onion Guard, Onion Enclosure.
And then of course, I kind of thought, I don't know, Gamla Uppsala is the modern Swedish form of the city, right? Like old Uppsala.
Yeah, in Old Norse, the name of Uppsala is actually plural. It's Uppsalir.
Right. But it doesn't have the old yet, because it's not old yet.
Well, I think that the old Uppsala is a particular part of
oh, there he is.
Of Uppsala. Yeah, the Lord and Savior is among
he
us.
Arriveth.
He is among us now.
No, you said the forbidden word.
Oh, hey, Luke.
Hello.
Hey, how are you doing?
How you doing, Jackson? I'm good.
I'm keeping it going. Looks like you've been having a good few weeks over there.
Absolutely. I've never seen so much of the US all at once. It's been pretty fabulous.
Yeah. Hey, We're talking right now to one of my Patreon supporters, Adrian, who is
Hello.
well, he's showing off and talking about his writings in Old Norse as a way to study Old Norse, and he celebrates you as his Lord and Savior. So I just thought that you ought to step in and say a few words.
Disabuse him
just-
of that admiration.
You can't just tell him that. That was supposed to be a thing between us.
Well, very flattered. Adrian, right? Did I get your
Right,
name?
yes.
That well, I'm sure whatever I seem to have done, you're already doing much better. Certainly with Old Norse language, I've barely even looked at. So, are these your writings?
This is mine. You've missed the full story, which I finished. This is just the rough draft of the next one.
Yeah,
Let's
so
see.
actually it's pretty cool because part of what he's doing is he's taking the concept, the story behind like country songs, like what if you want to show him, Adrian, you've already done Big Iron and actually turned it into like a short Old Norse saga, and it works really well.
Wait, I have to stop.
I mean, you know, thematically the stories are quite similar. Anyway, it reminds me of the kind of thing that you do, so I thought you might also
Absolutely.
get a kick out of seeing.
Right. Or, for example, translating Star Wars into Old Norse, among other things. Those are all. I mean, I always opine those are great ways to learn and to study languages, to do some kind of production. Writing is great because, unlike speaking, you get plenty of time to think about it. And composing something, it's a huge amount of value in that, putting things together, and then your own experiences, your own personality gets put into it as well, and that self-expression is something I find to be very valuable.
Yeah.
Right. Actually, the thing is, I did want to talk about. I think that was one of the things I sent in the email. Is this kind of like my pitch as for why I think Tatooina Dörla Saga is really valuable for trying to at least write in Old Norse. You are more than welcome to make a counter pitch if you feel like it needs to be buried and forgotten forever. But the kind of analogy I thought of, and this is probably going to make you all cringe very hard, but it's kind of like, you know, you're trying to make a dinner with a particular cut of meat. And so you have two options. Either you just buy a cow, you know, you go to the Sagas directly and you try to, you know, sort of cut out the piece, figure out what you want yourself, or you go to someone who can cut it up for you and then take the part you need there. So really what I'm trying to say is, you know, your Tatooina Saga, you've already put in the work to translate modern concepts from the sagas. Like you've already done the extraction of the concepts, so that when I try to like, I need to think of, for example, a funeral. How would I describe a funeral? Like I could now try and read all sagas to find a funeral, and there I could just, I know that Anakin buries his mother, so I just look in the Tatooina Saga where he buries his mother and look what you kind of wrote out to describe the funeral. No, in that way, the saga allows you to skip the having to work through the saga yourself, because you've done it for us already. Does that make any sense when I say it that way?
I can kind of see what you mean. I mean, I'm not going to stand here and condemn Tatooina Dörla Saga to you exactly. It's more like, you know, I feel like Gandalf, you know, encountering Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas in the woods, and they call him Gandalf, and he says, "That's what they used to call me," right? I mean, it's just
yeah.
This thing is so long ago to me.
I can understand from a standpoint of, you know, it's Star Wars. If you don't care about it from the content, then I can understand that totally. But it's the what you've done with writing the saga that's important, because you essentially, it allows you to, whenever somebody comes to you and says, how would I express this in Old Norse? How would I express this in Old Norse? You can just say, I've done this already, and then just redirect them to what you've done already. So it's a valuable piece of work because it condenses so much work you've already done, even if it's on a topic that's rather silly.
I see what you mean. And, you know, like you said, it is amazing what you learn just from doing it. I mean, like I was looking at your new composition, at the first few lines you were showing us. And one of the first things that I thought about is you said Thessi Sagan, and then wasn't it like Ger Loigar Baxter?
Gerlaux Baxter's Corner.
Yeah, so but I thought to myself, you know, actually the word saga wouldn't have the article there because it's possessed by a defined person, right? If you say in English like the saga of the people of Tatooine, or Valley, the word saga is never definite there. It's only the possessing thing that's definite. And the reason I know that it occurred to me is because I wrote something in Old Norse and I, paid attention to these patterns because I wanted to imitate them.
Right.
It is a fact that whatever competence I have in the language, and people could disagree on how much that is, a lot of it comes from the fact that I did try to write in it. And, I still draw on those experiences 12 years later.
Right, and I guess to put an example to my point is that really the whole thing was born when I read your Tatooine saga, and I found the way that the whole Han Solo versus Greedo thing, because in essence, I copied that one-to-one with the whole shooting axis as an exchange for shooting with revolvers. And
right.
It's like just the kind of thing I wouldn't have thought of that. I would have tried to, maybe with bows and arrows or something, or I would have told myself, they don't throw axes. That's not something they do. But then obviously you must have written that for a reason. Well, and so if the doctor accepts it as possible, then who am I to doubt him?
Oh, you're always welcome to doubt me. But, well, by the way, are there any questions, remarks, especially questions anyone wants to throw in here at this point?
Yes, please.
For anyone here about learning languages and practicing this way. Luke, take a look at this. This is 5 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And this is all by Adrian?
This is all by me, yes.
Good job, man.
I even put in a small copyright based on Dr. Crawford's. I don't know why. I guess the thing is I've never actually
take ownership of your work. Take ownership of your work. Absolutely.
Why not? But the thing is I've never, like, this was born out of a whim. I didn't actually think of the full ramifications of publishing something. Like, I wouldn't even know where or how, and then fears of having it stolen. Why why would somebody try to steal it? But these are all thoughts that I didn't really think about it because it was for fun, and then the weight of what I'd done only really set in later. But yeah,
for whatever reason,
I'm more than happy to claim this as mine, other than unlike Dr. Crawford.
For whatever reason, this process always goes the other way for me, where I feel like I'm doing something weighty at the time, and then afterwards I'm like, oh well, I don't even know why I did this. I go the other way.
I
guess now that it's done, it doesn't really have too much weight for me either. It's just the process of doing it was really fun. Like, that's in this case really the road was the finish line.
Yeah, that's what.
Well, it's remarkable. I can understand very little of it based on my watching of quite a number of Jackson's videos. So Mother had Thorkel, the man. That's Thorkel. It's like, it's a way to say that's the introducing of this character. Is that I follow that?
Man was named. Yeah.
Het. All right, Heisen. Got it.
Yeah. Right.
There's my. Like... I should probably study German. And Han var Norryn at. He was Norrin and something. That's as far as I get.
Well, and so actually, this is something that Adrian has picked up on right here. This is how you express that someone is whatever in descent. He's Norwegian with respect to his family.
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
the ot is like our preposition ot, but it has a lot of senses of sort of like with respect to, in regard to. So he's Norwegian with regard to his family. It's Norwegian by
Right.
descent.
Hmm.
And of course, you wouldn't necessarily know that that's how you would say that in Old Norse. But of course, if you're taking the time to try to imitate natural writing, then you're going to find expressions like that.
Right, imitating idiom. That's I think a really important lesson I learned with active uses of, say, Latin or ancient Greek the past several years, is that one can use Latin grammar with a lot of words that are taken directly from, say, Italian or Spanish or something. For example, both those languages have telefonar and telefonare. Spanish is telefonar. So one would think, well, you can just use a verb telefonare in Latin. Why not? And the reason is that idiomatically Latin doesn't create verbs very often and would use a different idiomatic expression, which would literally be to call someone by means of telephone. Vocare telefono would be preferable. And why? Because it's imitation of a whole bunch of things that are proper in the language. There's all kinds of regularities that languages have, and it depends what one's goal is. And I think, like you were just saying, that the imitating the works that we're trying to read better or with more intuition as best we can is the way to do that.
And that's a really interesting point about a difference between modern Italian or Spanish versus Latin, where you would expect, well, a lot of modern Western European languages are very ready to just take nouns and verb them, right? I was thinking about this. There was something I was doing with Swedish where I learned that to the shovel is literally, shovel is whiffle, and to shovel is whiffla, yeah, whifflada, I shoveled. I thought that this is not at all probably what I would do in Old Norse. I think I would say like I lifted with the shovel or something like that. Like Old Norse just isn't as like noun to verby as a lot of modern Western European languages are. That strikes me as a really big trend in the last few hundred years for a lot of these languages, that it's not there in ancient and medieval languages as much. Although Greek, I guess, seems a little bit more.
That's the thing. Different languages have differences there. Ancient Greek can much more readily and does more readily as a habit make verbs from nouns and vice versa. And so does Coptic, which I've discovered. Like Sagi means say, and it also means word. So it's both the verb and the noun, and they have that with all kinds of things. Like osh means read, but when it's used as a noun, it means lesson. Just like by coincidence, like the Latin legere, to read, lectio, a lesson. So it's
but of course, a lot of where you get this is by actually practicing writing. Thomas, by the way, has a question. Adrian, he asks, how do you generally approach looking for these expressions like at?
So I'm not sure if in this particular example, I think that was something you told me. So most of the times it really is just digging through the sagas. Like Tadrina Saga can help with that, as I've outlined, but in the end you really do have to read them. There's just no way around it, because you can. Cleese Bevikvisten has helped me, because the one that I use and which I've shown before, and has really good examples, and it shows you where you have to look for them. But in the end, all you can really do is read the text and then see, I think what I did is I looked up Norrøn, and then I looked up like where it appears, and then you just have to look how these kinds of phrases are used. It's a process, and oftentimes not easy, especially when it's about more complicated expressions.
I think that getting regular exposure to literature like what you're imitating really is the key there.
Right.
Your reading and your writing fuel each other in that case, right? If you're reading a chapter from a saga every day, then every day you're going to encounter new expressions that you hadn't before. You might not memorize all of them, obviously, but you might have some recollection that, oh yeah, I remember there was a time when someone was introduced as being descended from a place, and they go back and find where that character first comes up or something like that. I think that the reading fuels the writing, and then the writing allows you to understand more of the reading, because you've had to think about how you would express yourself, and you recognize now Old Norse writers expressing themselves the same way.
Right.
Have you, and actually, I was about to ask a stupid question, Jackson, have you done a lot of transcription of Old Norse? That is dumb. Of course you have, because of the books that have like the Wanderer's Havamal, which has transcription, obviously, of the Old Norse as well. But have you done a fair amount of that?
Well, that's definitely the first thing that comes to mind. I guess my master's thesis, which was on, I mean, it's debatably Old Norse. It was on the oldest translation of the New Testament into Icelandic. I actually did write out by hand the book of Matthew in 1540 Icelandic, which in itself, actually, so what I did, and this, I don't know, this maybe strikes me as something that is related to this. I wrote out line by line in an actual paper notebook with pen the book of Matthew in the Vulgate, in Luther, in the Old English interlinear translation, and in the 1540 Icelandic. Basically, in the process, like training myself to know the text so well that I could spot what was different and how things were being expressed. Where the translation subtly differed. It helped me. Actually, that was one thing that helped me notice a lot of the syntactic things about Old Norse, a lot of little realizations that have stuck with me through the years too. Like the thing about how relative clauses are always headed by a noun that has the word that on it, because that was something that was in the Old Norse that was not in any of the other languages.
Yeah, I did that with Latin and Greek, and it's John. So that was very helpful. Also to notice the weird late Latin grammar differences, and and all those peculiarities, the differences, and also like you were saying, how Saga doesn't take the definite article. That's how I learned that ancient Greek, when you say the first chapter, it's chapter first, not even chapter the first, just Gipedaion proton, not Gipedaion to proton. The isn't put in those kinds of expressions, probably for a certain idiomatic reason that's similar to what happens in Old Norse.
Right. And of course, you wouldn't necessarily know that unless you had just dived that deep. And of course, I mean, as you come to understand how these languages express themselves more naturally, it helps you a great deal with your sideline as a forger of ancient Greek documents.
Right. Yeah, and I want to recommend for people who aren't maybe ready to write in Old Norse and whatever their target language is, write something original. Maybe that's just, you know that it's helpful, but you don't really have any ideas, or you don't feel comfortable writing complex idiom. Transcribing something that you like to read or already comfortable reading is a great way to get into the habit, especially if you have to get used to using the characters that you want to type, for example, if they're peculiar like they can be in Old Norse, or by hand. And then you start to notice as idiomatic patterns, and it becomes more natural. I found that in my own studies has helped a lot, transcribing, and then writing becomes kind of second nature, writing original things instead of just going right into starting to express myself.
Adrian, how do you find that?
The thing is, for me, it's hard to put into words. It was I haven't tried it that way, but it was I guess for me it's a thing of some less of copying or more of copying, and then starting to change like simple things, like taking a grammatically sound sentence from a saga, where look, this was written by somebody who knew what they were doing, and like looking at, okay, if I wanted to, for example, like if somebody says like a red shirt or something, so you look at, okay, this is the case that the adjective red is in, like, and then you change it, like you change it from red to yellow, and then you look at, how do I have to put this word? How does this word change? And so, like slowly then you build up the confidence to make more bold changes to the sentences, so, to gain more of an my English is failing me. To gain more confidence in thinking about these things and in making innovations,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we were talking to Richard Simcott. We mentioned one thing you can do is with all those books in modern languages that start you off with dialogues where, Becky says that she's, 29 years old and she's from Flagstaff, Arizona. Like you don't have to say that. Like you can say, well, how would I say the equivalent stuff about myself? Right. And so you're kind of converting it as you go. Elena says, Adrian, I'd love to hear more about the more fantasy-oriented ideas that you originally had. I have a fantasy of learning Icelandic to read some of the fiction Ármann Jakobsson has published because it sounds like such a playful use of the old myths.
So that actually is a somewhat of a good transition, since I told you that I like writing chronicles. Something I started because I've been exposed to medieval chronicles a lot. Is I've actually also started writing a Latin chronicle, which is kind of cool that the Lord himself is currently present.
Oh heavens, how may I possibly disabuse you of the notion, or if I could get some kind of title that doesn't make me feel terrible. The Verbs.
Only your touch upon his forehead could.
No, it's just I really I guess the thing with the fiction is I also do stuff like D&D, so I guess if I can say these sort of things, there's a certain role play aspect to it, but not an extensive, like I don't go out there and pretend to be a Viking, but
sure.
I just really like integrating the things that I learn like scientifically in university. I like to integrate that actively into my fantasy, into my private things, and make those work really well. I think there are even some of my uni courses I took because of private interests, and so I've written parts of an Old Norse chronicle of a fictional Norse kingdom, and I've also written a Latin chronicle, which is much more rudimentary because I've been basing that largely on the chronicle which I've been reading, which some of that I want to share with you if there's time, because I think that's rather interesting to go a little more into my history field and less into the linguistics. But there's Old Norse involved, or Norse involved, so it's not too boring for you. But yeah, I've just been, writing stories by using this format of a chronicle, just because it has a very repetitive sort of language, like, because it's not a prose narrative, it's very, very factual, so you can write in a very stilted and factual way and still make it work.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
If that makes sense.
And I like your role-playing analogy. I do see what you mean. I mean, like in a sense, you are in a sense, there's a different persona that you're writing with, right? I mean, you're thinking of how someone 800 years ago, maybe 2000 years ago, if you're talking about Latin, would be thinking about something and expressing it. I can see the role play analogy. I mean, in fact, I think I've mentioned before that I briefly, in 2008, so even before Tatooine de la Saga days, actually was the dungeon master in a campaign that used medieval languages as the spoken languages of the characters.
Right.
Have I ever talked about that? It was a pretty brief experiment, but like, for example, it was all people who knew some ancient medieval language. So like you had to know the language and you actually had to speak it in character. So you could only talk to characters who had the same language.
Right.
And so people had to come up with a character that would know the same language as they did. So if you knew Old English and Latin, you were probably like an English cleric, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's also long ago in a different galaxy.
Right. I guess if we can go on a kind of tangent a little, which I guess I'll just introduce the chronicle that I've been working on, because it has some aspects of the story about Lombard origins, which is rather cool because it actually mentions Odin, the god, and like Germanic mythology, which
I know
is
the one
really
you're
cool
talking
because
about.
as a West Germanic historian, continental Europe, there's not a lot of the cool Norse stuff in it. It's all very Christian, very early. So, seeing these kinds of connections, even just in passing, is really cool. I guess I'll just share the page. Which one is it? It's this one. Of course, this is in German, but there's also the Latin along with it. And I guess I'll have to introduce it first. This is the so-called Chronicle of Fredegar. He is called this, but we do not know what his real name is. And the one thing that's rather problematic about him is that he writes around 660 AD. So that's like 100 years before the Carolingian reforms. So what he's writing it's not yet like medieval classic Latin. It's actually, or something you notice is that his language is probably something in a transitionary phase from Latin to Old French. So you notice that his Latin is rather bad in places, and he tries his best to write good Latin, but he fails to in many places.
Well, like I'm wondering if an example is qui instituerat nomen concidere victoriam. I'm not like, I feel like
What line is that?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like line 10.
Say the words again. Sorry, I missed
Qui
it.
instituerat nomen
Oh, yeah.
concidere victoriam. I'm like, is concidere supposed to be an imperative, or is that supposed to be referring back to the same subject as instituerat? I feel like there's some non-agreement there, but okay.
Well, I don't think it's okay with the infinitive and accusative because it's the thing that they had cried aloud. They cried aloud for them to concede victory, if I'm following.
Okay.
So that might be okay. I noticed it in Precipunt or Precipunt in the 4th line, which if the verb is capio, it's an I stem one. So if it is the verb I'm thinking of, it should be praecipiunt. Is that right, Adrian?
I'm not entirely sure because the translation I have is only in German, and I've tried comparing
what
they, right. Excuse me.
Does it have or something like precept or what's the German there?
Wait,
hello there.
We just switch the sides here. So this is the part I wanted to read because I was going to sort of translate ad hoc into English because I tried finding an English translation of this, but essentially this is the origin story of the Lombards, which I maybe Dr. Crawford from Paul the Deacon, the Origo Gentis Langobardorum.
Yeah.
Because what Fredegar does is he collects a large amount of medieval chronicles of older ones and then kind of uses them to write his own story. Like he puts it all together and he oftentimes omits things. So basically what he says here is that here it's like I'll just read it in German first and I'll try to translate it. Die Langobarden aber geboten ihren Weibern, ihr Haupthaar um Backe und Kinn zu binden, um durch den Anschein von Männertracht das Haar der Frauen um Backe und Kinn gelegt, sieht nämlich aus wie ein sehr langer Bart, eine große Feindesmacht vorzutäuschen. Da soll eine Stimme über beide Heere gesagt haben, dies sind die Langbärte. Diese Völkerschaften behaupten, dies hätte ihr Gott gesagt, den sie als Heiden Wodan nannten. So which is basically the Lombards told their wives to bind their hair around their chins, that it looks like long beards. And then a voice from the heavens was supposed to have said, these are the long beards. And the long beards called themselves that because they say that their god Wodan told them this. So this is rather cool because the original story from Paul the Deacon actually mentions it far more in detail. Like he mentions that it's a story about Wodan saying that he'll give victory to whatever people he says he sees first out of two. And then what his wife does is, I think it's his wife, Freya, tells the Lombards to have the wives tie the hair around their chins to appear as though beards. And then she turns Odin's bed. And then he sees these bearded women first and tells them, who are these long beards?
Right.
And then his wife tells him, you call them that, now give them victory.
Right,
What I find cool is that, here he kind of omits the entire story and just kind of mentions that, they are heathens, they call him Wodan.
Yeah. Well, and of course there's the key thing in the story that in these old Germanic speaking cultures, giving a name, you also give a gift. So having given the gift of the name Longbeards, he's supposed to give them a gift.
Also, cool thing, the name Wodan in Latin.
Wodanus.
Wodano, apparently. But I think this is more of Dr. Rainieri's expertise.
I'm no doctor of any sort, though I thank you for the title. Yeah, no, that's the great is. Was it Heiden Wodan in German?
It
Helden
was
something?
den sie als Heiden Wodan nannten. So
what does Heiden mean?
Heiden is heathen.
Oh, heathen. Yeah, that's not here in the Latin, except the fanatike. They fanatically name him Wodano.
No.
It could be. It's not really clear to me what it's trying to do. The o suffix, like in Italian or one or Spanish, on is a augmentative suffix, so like the great Wodan, or it could be imitative of the Germanic language of the time. It looks exactly like an irregular third declension accusative in ancient Greek, like Kallisto or something, but that's not what it is.
Yeah,
that's why this chronicle is so interesting to me, because you really, I feel a personal connection to this guy, because he's trying to write in a language that he doesn't properly know anymore. Like, of course, it's not French yet. He's like, it's in the transitionary period where it's like beginning to be old French. Now it's losing the cases. There's just the nominative and the oblique case. But you notice that he's trying really hard, and he's copying like phrases from older, more accomplished Latin authors to make himself sound better. And that kind of resonates with me, because that's what I'm doing as well. I'm copying from older works to make myself look smarter.
I think it's a perfectly legitimate practice, and that's cool that you cite him as a particular inspiration.
That's how I feel about Apuleius. Everybody thinks his Latin isn't very classical, so I'm like, I like this guy.
Right, and then there's actually another cool line which actually has some confusing Latin that has ramifications for the science behind it. Because one thing is that many historians actually thought that the Merovingian kings of early Francia had a sort of like a history of having being a divine descendants, like sort of like the Anglo-Saxons, I think, because of two things. One, because in 100 years later, Einhard writes that the Merovingians were pulled on an ox cart, and then the story of the Merovingians apparently being descendants of a sea beast in the shape of a bull. Wait, let me just put this up here. Here, I'll give you the English rundown first. So, dieses Geschlecht wurde in heidnischen Festen gefeiert. Man erzählt, Clodio habe sich einmal im Sommer mit seiner Gattin an den Meeresstrand begeben. Als seine Gemahlin mittags zum Baden ins Meer hinaus wartete, habe sie ein Meerungeheuer mit Stierkopf angefallen. Ob sie nun daraufhin von dem Untier oder von ihrem Manne empfing, sie gebar jedenfalls einen Sohn mit dem Namen Meroveus, nachdem später die Könige der Franken Merowinger genannt wurden. So, in the short form, the Merovingian family was celebrated in heathen cults, because people used to say that King Claudio went to the seaside, and when his wife went out to bathe in the sea, she was attacked by what the original calls a kino tower, which is translated as a sea beast with a bull's head. And then whether or not it is unknown whether she conceived from the monster or from her husband. She gave birth to the son Merovech, after which the people are called, or the kings were called, Merovingians. Now, the thing is that in the Latin, apparently, if I understand correctly, it isn't specified whether he means either or both. And so, it's, I think it's here, it's this line, cumque in continuo aut abistia aut aviro fuiset concepta. So apparently historians aren't really sure whether that means either or both, because
That's fascinating.
both interpretations have been kind of accepted at times.
Yeah, I can come at it from my non-medieval Latin perspective, and cumque in continuo aut in bestia bestias, in bestia aut aviro fuisit concepta, peperit filium nomen. So yeah, it's unclear. And but the German made it clear. What did the German translation do?
The translation I have here makes it explicit that ob sie nun daraufhin von dem Untier oder von ihrem Mann empfangen, with implication like whether or not or it is unknown whether or not she conceived either from her husband or from the beast. Either way, she gave birth to a son who was then named Merovech.
It seems to be the same. In what way does the Latin give ambiguity?
I'd have to actually look up the scientific text. So apparently there are some who have read it as meaning both, but it's highly controversial because from this and from the story of the Merovingian kings being driving around the country on an ox cart, kind of like I think the thing in Sweden where they put the statue of Freyr on a cart and put it around, traveled around with it through the countryside.
Yeah. Also,
they thought, sorry.
Also in Tacitus. Yeah.
Right. So kind of like the story was, did they actually believe in their kings being descended like from having divine descendancy from a beast of the sea? Because I think the original calls it a bestia Neptuni kinotauri, like a beast of Neptune, like sort of putting a pagan spin to it.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things that I'm discussing in my paper, because they say it's rather unlikely that this is the case. This isn't, because this is not a story that is seen anywhere else in medieval chronicles. It's just Fredegar that tells of this descendancy, and really what this amounts to is that he's ridiculing the Merovingian kings, because it isn't clear whether the kings were descendant from a pagan beast or from the actual king.
Right.
Because we've talked about this before, the whole the story of Troy, of many people just saying that they're descendants of Troy. It's the same here really. First, he tells the story of how the Franks apparently came from Troy, only to then tell that the later kings might have actually not even been those heroic people who came from Troy, but just the story of a king born out of rape by a sea beast. So it's not only interesting for the ambiguity of the language, but also from what it's trying to say.
Right.
Well, BK Winter said clarified my question of whether or means an exclusive or one or the other or both. And
yes.
And in classical Latin, the word that would be potentially inclusive would be well, meaning you want ice cream or donuts, and you might want both. That'd be well. But if it's either or out, which is used here, but like you of course have been clear to mention, Adrian, his Latin is not classical, and therefore those kinds of usages cannot be expected. If it were well, it would definitely have the potential to be inclusive, and the out here, if it were classical, means exclusivity.
Right.
But we can doubt that if we doubt his Latin, which is easy.
So by the way, Adrian, if you want to make perhaps some concluding remarks, or if there's a concluding question in the audience, I have to go before very long.
Right. I see it's 10 to.
I've
Um,
appreciated getting this look at the method and the idea behind what you're doing, because I think that it is a really richly rewarding way to actually learn how a language productively works and not just how to read it. Which, by the way, is kind of similar to, of course, what Luke Ranieri does. And by the way, Luke, I don't know if you noticed, but I am working my way through this.
Optime, amiche. That's great. Looking good. Well, I'll take my leave and allow you to conclude. Thanks for letting me stop by, and nice seeing all of you. Nice meeting you, Adrian. Vielen
Thank you.
Dank.
I mean, I guess the pleasure is all mine, seeing as how I told the story to Dr. Crawford. A friend of mine actually introduced me to your channel, and so gave you the highest praise. So I think I'll blow his mind later when I tell him, oh yeah, I just talked to the man himself.
That's
I
very
would have
hear.
asked for a digital autograph, but I think
I
another time.
was very flattering to hear. I'm sure I'm not worthy of any such praise, but I'm glad I got to be with you all today. And thanks. Walete. Bye.
Wiedersehen.
Wiedersehen.
Yeah, I guess my closing remarks would be, don't skip classes just because you want to write Old Norse by yourself. It's still the classes that you've put on YouTube are extremely helpful, and many of the examples that you use to explain grammar oftentimes ended up in my texts just because whenever I needed something, either you uploaded a video that exactly gave me what I needed, or I found something was recommended to me that I needed. So I find it a very valuable and important tool to help learning Old Norse. But of course, skipping the actual grammar part and learning that isn't good. So you have to do both, really, I think. And really, it's when you learn a modern language, you learn both the speaking part, the writing part, and the reading part. And so just because the language isn't actively spoken, skipping out on one of these parts doesn't seem logical, because you're really depriving yourself of a method of learning something.
I think that's all very well stated. And we will look forward to seeing more of your work in future office hours. PK Wonder did want to ask, what is up with modern German and its crazy borders? Okay, we'll have to deal with that some other time.
Right. I mean, I get the only thing that really limits me in this is that I only get to, have a heart-to-heart with you once a month. And I also kind of feel bad always taking up most of the office hours. So
I mean, it's what they're there for. I often feel bad that I don't manage to give more to Patreon in this sort of way, but I think the office hours being a good experiment, and I'm sorry that the way that September worked out, I never got to schedule one, but I'll get one on the books for October soon.
Right. And then maybe I'll have something ready by then, I hope.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for your time, and thanks everybody for coming. And for now, I'm going to wish everybody all the best.
Wiedersehen.